We're now joined by Joshua Perry. The Big Ten Network joins us with Paul, Catalina, Craig Smoak, David Smoak on 365 Sports. Joshua, thanks for your patience. Among what we expected or you expected in the Big Ten, what has been the biggest surprise to you?
Well, this thing has kind of played out generally to my expectations. We knew Ohio State and Michigan were going to be really good in the Big Ten East, and that has been the case certainly. Penn State's been a surprise that they've gotten better at the offensive line and the run game specifically, so that's good to see. Michigan State probably the biggest surprise out of the East with as much as they've struggled, but those past defense struggles go back to a year ago. They were abysmal. And you look over to the West, I expected Wisconsin to be down a little bit. I expected Iowa to have a very poor offense, and I looked at Minnesota as a team who was going to be able to take control of that division. It looks like they're going to be able to this season. The team that I had higher expectations for this season was Purdue, and they have found ways to lose games throughout the early part of the season. So that's a little bit of a shock there, but I mean, it's been pretty much chalk for me in the Big Ten.
What does Wisconsin have to do to get out of their little funk here?
I mean, the offense has to be more explosive. Graham Mertz has shown flashes, but against good competition, he certainly struggled. And Ohio State presented that issue for him a week ago, and I think it goes to two things: is the development curve for Graham Mertz certainly needs to increase. Ohio State's way better on defense, and I would take the defensive performance against Ohio State by Wisconsin as more of an aberration because of how good that Ohio State offense is. I think their defense will be fine, especially as they get into some Big Ten West games, because there aren't a lot of teams over there that are going to really be super explosive offensively. But for this Wisconsin team, like Graham Mertz has to find ways to make the big plays. Wide receivers out on the edges have to get open. Braylon Allen can't do it all alone.
Joshua, Iowa hosting number 4 Michigan this weekend. We know the story with Iowa, tremendous defense, not a lot to really love offensively. Can they play well enough defensively and score enough to perhaps topple the Wolverines this weekend, who look awfully good in their own right?
Yeah, I was thinking about this game earlier in the week, and I said if Michigan gets to 17 points, the game is over. That's how I feel about this Iowa offense. At this juncture, Michigan needs to be wary of this trap, though, as Iowa's a team, you mentioned how good their defense is. They're a very patient defense, and they're a pretty simple defense in the fact that they don't run a ton of coverages. So they know what hurts them. They know how to play what they do extremely well. And when you're Michigan and you've got 2 young coordinators on offense and a young quarterback, patience is going to be the key. So for the coordinators, like, if the big play is not there, you just take what's underneath. You don't have to show everything you worked on throughout the week just because you worked on it. You call the things that you know are going to work. For J.J. McCarthy, I know you want to push the football down the field. You want to make those dazzling plays that everybody knows you're capable of. But sometimes the best play is going to be the check down to Blake Corum, where you can get 5 or 6 yards. He might be able to run through a couple of tackles, and it ends up squirting for 10 to 15. That's an awesome play. But when you start getting greedy and you want to really test this Iowa team down the field, that is where they hurt you, because they can take the football away with the best of them. So that's my analysis on them. If Michigan goes out there and they do some uncharacteristic things offensively, and they're back to what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. They're running tight ends out there, heavy emphasis on the run game. They take the shots down the field, but they really try to play it close to their vest, which I think really works. If they get away from that, this could end up being a tricky game. But outside of that, I really see this Michigan team as a very good football team who can compete at the highest level, and they should be able to handle this game, be in full control from the beginning.
When you're in the Big Ten in the East with Michigan, Ohio State, what Penn State's doing, and you thought Michigan State would be a part of that battering ram as well. If you blink or whatever, you could find yourself in trouble. What is Michigan State in trouble?
They are. They're in big trouble, in my opinion. It's time to sound the alarms over there. And I was actually on the call for their game this past weekend where they hosted Minnesota. And from the opening drive, Minnesota got the ball first. It felt like that game was going to be out of reach, which is a wild thing to say. But Minnesota was able to just grind out the clock on them. In Michigan State, defensively, I mentioned earlier, they have struggled. Those struggles have not been fixed. And, it's mind-boggling to me because I think Mel Tucker is a really good coach, and he's cut his teeth coaching defense. They haven't figured it out yet. And then offensively, they really have not been able to get into a good groove because they haven't been on the field all that much. Go back a couple weeks ago to when they visited Washington. Washington got up in that game early on. Michigan State's in chase mode. They can't establish the run game. They're trying to throw the football down the field. Peyton Thorne makes a mistake in that game that they wish they probably had back, and it's over from there. You look at this game that they had against Minnesota, and Minnesota's defense is a defense that gets off the field 70% of the time on third down. Michigan State's drives were extremely slow, and Minnesota at one point in that game had a 10-minute offensive drive, have not been able to get into a rhythm offensively. So I look at this as the defensive side of the ball struggling, and now it's really leaking over and affecting the offense too.
Joshua, do you feel that there is a team in the Big Ten that has not hit their, like you mentioned Purdue, could they hit their stride late in the season and build something to next year, or is there another team like that could do that?
You know, I talked to former Penn State quarterback Christian Hackenberg. He's become a good friend of mine. He is still in on Purdue. I've kind of gone away from it because I've seen them do too many things to hurt themselves. Is that correctable? Absolutely. Do I have confidence in them right now? Not a ton. The sleeper team that people need to keep their eye on is Illinois. Mm-hmm. They have a very good defense. Ryan Walters, they paid a ton of money to keep him in the offseason. That money has certainly paid off. Their offense looks different. Barry Lunny Jr. is their offensive coordinator right now. They're putting guys in space. They've got transfer quarterback Tommy DeVito, who's done a pretty good job for them. But, you know, it's not like they have maulers up front, but they use their offensive line to move around and create running lanes for Chase Brown, who's the leading rusher in the country right now. They're playing Wisconsin this weekend. Wisconsin, I believe, is favored by 7. I don't know if the line's moved since I last checked it. I would take Illinois outright in that game. I think that's a really good football team, and Brett Bielema is a heck of a coach.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think Illinois is a fun team that probably not a lot of people are talking about, but they will. I think they will start as the rest of the season goes along. In terms of PJ Fleck in Minnesota, up until last week, you could argue, well, let's see him play somebody, and they play Michigan State, and they just demolish Michigan State, and we, you know, like you just got done saying, don't know really where Michigan State is, but that felt like kind of a statement. What do you think the trajectory is of PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers at the moment?
They could be in Indianapolis by the end of the year for the Big Ten championship game. I firmly believe that. And I know a lot of people had questions about their early schedule, and they played some dogs. They played some awful teams, but they were in full control of those games. They executed their game plan the way that they want to, which is a heavy dose of Mo Ibrahim on the ground. Tanner Morgan looks so much better now that Kirk Sherrock is back as offensive coordinator at Minnesota. They run an RPO system, and Tanner Morgan has looked precise and confident in full command of that offense. Their offensive line was replacing 4 out of 5 starters. Those guys look great up to this point. Chris Ottman-Bell, their leading wide receiver, went down with an injury, and a bunch of guys stepped up against Michigan State. And then I said it about their defense. What they did to Michigan State was phenomenal in my eyes. But you can go back to last year. Statistically, one of the best defenses in the country, and nobody nationally talked about them. Nobody talked about them. They didn't talk about them this offseason. Nobody talked about them in the preseason. And they're doing the same thing they did a year ago. And I think PJ Fleck really embraces this idea that nobody's talking about them. But this is a team that's going to get plenty of buzz as the season comes to an end. Because I think if they can go out there and be true to what they are as a football team, run the ball, throw it efficiently, play great defense, emphasis on special teams, they can run the table in the West.
All right, so we know about USC and UCLA in that timeline. Is that even a part of the discussion now that the season has begun in the Big Ten?
You know, it pops up every once in a while, but everybody's focused on what's going on with the current 14 teams, and there have been some fun storylines coming out of the conference as of right now, so you don't necessarily need to talk to it. I think everybody's keeping their eye on what's going on out west, and USC certainly has opened some eyes with Lincoln Riley. He's a great coach. I think defensively they're going to need to get a little bit better, and they've made some strides on that side of the ball this year. So it's not to say that they have a bad defense, but coming into the Big Ten, they'll be challenged. But great additions. This offseason was a lot of fun just talking about that. I think those two teams are going to add so much value to what we see on the football field. But it hasn't been a ton of chatter because we're so inundated with all the fun things coming out of Big Ten land right now.
So go ahead, Paul.
Joshua, if I turned you into Trev Alberts right now, who's the first guy you're texting for that job?
Oh, man, that's such a tough question. I mean, Lance Leipold feels like a guy who's opened a lot of eyes. What Kansas is doing right now is ridiculous. Is he the splashy hire, though? And I think Nebraska fans really want to make a splash with who they hire next. He would be at the top of my list. Jim Leonard, who's defensive coordinator right now at Wisconsin's another guy who I'd look at, but again, probably not the splash that folks are looking for. As you go deeper down, like, does Matt Campbell feel like a good fit? I mean, he's got ties to Big Ten country, spent a lot of time in the state of Ohio. It's where he grew up. He's recruited well enough at Iowa State, and that's a tough place to win. He's had success there. Do you think you could make a phone call to Dave Aranda and see if you can pull him away from Baylor? Like, there are some guys who I'd be really interested in. I think they're in a very tough spot, though, because you have to hit on this hire, and everybody thought Scott Frost was going to be a home run. It turned out to be the exact opposite. And if you're Trev Alberts, as much as I've talked about making a splash, like, you just got to get the right guy. You have to spend so much time interviewing. You have to exhaust all resources. You're going to have to open up the pocketbooks, which is no problem over there in Nebraska. They're highly capitalized. And ultimately, it's got to be the right fit, because this is a fan base that probably is a little bit unrealistic about what their ceiling should be as a program. Probably not in the national title hunt like you were back in the 90s, but there's no reason why they can't be that competitor who makes it to the Big Ten championship game every handful of years, and then maybe you can pull off a surprise from there.
Thank you very much, Joshua. Leave Dave Aranda alone. He's not leaving Waco or Baylor, and it's a great fit. But I understand his name obviously being out there because of how successful he's been. Great work, man. We appreciate you. Hope to get you on again, if you don't mind, right down the road.
Yeah, you guys just give me a call. Let me know when you want to have me back. This was awesome. Thank you.
Yes, sir. That's, again, Joshua Perry, Big Ten Network on many things. Minnesota does look good. And then, of course, you know about Ohio State and Michigan. Wisconsin, who are they? And what about Michigan State and among others like Iowa as well?
You want to know something?